At the beginning of our film today, we are introduced to Rick Carver, a real estate agent being interrogated at a crime scene. This is because he was the last person to meet Mr. Caldwell, who ended his life with a gun. Despite the gravity of the situation, Rick doesn't seem surprised and continues taking work-related calls while talking to the police. After finishing his calls, he explains to the police that as soon as Caldwell saw him, he entered the house and fired a shot. Although this seems suspicious, the situation doesn't shock Rick. We learn that he works with banks to seize homes, and Mr. Caldwell was one of the homeowners losing his property. Instead of facing his fate, he decided to end his life. Rick remains completely unaffected by what happened and recalls the events with a cold and ruthless demeanor. In the next scene, we meet Dennis Nash, a carpenter living with his son. He works hard to support his family, but he is struggling with severe financial issues. The bank demands about $80,000 from him, and his house is on the verge of foreclosure, leaving his family at risk of homelessness. To save his home, Dennis goes to court with his son Connor, hoping to negotiate with the bank representatives. However, the judge only grants him a 30-day extension. Dennis pleads for more time, but no one agrees. A court officer then escorts him out, making him feel completely defeated. On the way home, he has no idea how to fix the situation but reassures his son that he will do everything possible to keep their home. Despite trying to comfort him, deep inside, he is extremely worried. At night, he searches for jobs that could provide him with decent income. He considers different opportunities, makes numerous calls, and reaches out to everyone he knows. However, he fails to secure any job, and with every rejection, his frustration grows. At that moment, he starts losing hope and decides to give up. But then, something happens that changes everything. Several officers, along with Rick Carver, arrive at Dennis's house. They inform him that the bank has officially taken ownership of the house, and he and his family must leave immediately. Dennis protests, arguing that the judge gave him a 30-day extension, but Rick shows him a signed court order confirming the bank's final decision. This means they have no choice but to leave. Rick also informs him that the bank had offered him $3,500 to help with moving expenses, but since he declined, he no longer has time to prepare. Dennis and his mother, Lynn, refuse to leave, leading to a heated argument with the officers. The police warn them that if they do not comply, they will be arrested. Lynn argues that they are being wrongfully evicted, but one of the officers coldly tells her that she is the one trespassing now, as the house no longer belongs to them, it belongs to the bank. With no other option, Dennis and his mother start packing, trying to take their most valuable belongings before leaving. A while later, Connor returns from school and is shocked to find them being evicted. He tries to enter his room, but Dennis stops him, telling him they can no longer stay. Connor is devastated as he watches their home being taken away from them. Afterward, Dennis and his family say goodbye to their neighbors and move into a motel. That night, Dennis makes countless phone calls, desperately looking for any job. He even offers to work as a plumber, but no one is willing to hire him. At night, Lynn suggests moving to live with Dennis's uncle. However, Dennis refuses because he doesn't want to take Connor away from his friends and school. The next morning, they wake up determined to find any available job. Later, Dennis gets into a dispute with a group of people, accusing them of stealing his work tools. In the middle of the argument, Rick Carver suddenly appears and asks what is happening. When Dennis explains the situation, Rick receives a call and prepares to leave. Before walking away, Rick looks at Dennis and asks if he is looking for a job. He remembers that Dennis previously mentioned having carpentry experience. Rick offers him a small task for $50. Desperate for money, Dennis agrees immediately and follows Rick in his car. They arrive at one of the foreclosed homes, where there is a plumbing issue causing a horrible stench. Most workers refuse to clean or fix the problem. When Dennis sees the mess, he negotiates with Rick, offering to fix it for $250. Rick agrees. As Dennis enters the house, he realizes the issue is much worse than expected, and the disgusting smell makes him want to leave. He steps outside, and the other workers laugh at him. However, Dennis doesn't give up. He offers them drinks and extra money to help clean the mess. Eventually, they agree to assist, and Rick is impressed by Dennis's determination, realizing that he has valuable skills. After finishing the job, Dennis returns to the motel and proudly shows his family the money he earned. Lynn is relieved and sees a glimmer of hope. That night, they celebrate their small victory. The next day, Rick calls Dennis and asks him to come to a luxurious mansion to repair the air conditioning. While working, Dennis notices Rick's lavish lifestyle, his enormous house, expensive cars, and even his wife. However, Rick constantly receives frustrating phone calls, which makes Dennis realize that he has many enemies. After completing the repair, Rick drives Dennis back and offers him a well-paying job. Dennis accepts immediately without asking any details because he desperately needs the money. While driving, they spot a house illegally using electricity and water from a nearby property. When Rick realizes the house belongs to the bank, he turns the car around to investigate. He knocks on the door and confronts the occupants. Frank Green comes out and immediately agrees to remove the illegal connections. While disconnecting the utilities, he talks to Dennis and learns that their sons attend the same school. Frank also shares that he lost his job 2 years ago, accumulating debt until he lost his home. Before leaving, Frank apologizes. Rick sternly warns him not to do it again, stating that if it happens next time, he will have to deal with the police. Later, Dennis and Rick visit a high-end house, where Rick asks Dennis to remove the kitchen cabinets. After they finish, Rick gives Dennis money and offers him an official job at his company, Rick Carver Real Estate. Although Dennis hesitates, he knows he has no other choice. Before cashing the check, he asks Rick if he can use the money to get his house back, but Rick rejects the idea, telling him that he will help him do that, just not yet. Over time, Dennis continues working in Rick's shady business. He starts posting eviction notices for houses that are about to be foreclosed, forcing families out of their homes and stealing valuable items from them. Dennis takes pictures of air conditioners and pool pumps, then falsely reports that these items were missing. This allows Rick to make money off them while also collecting government funds. As time passes, the job becomes more stressful for Dennis. Sometimes, he is the one personally informing people that their homes have been foreclosed. The affected families react with devastation. Some threaten him, others break down in tears. Although he sympathizes with them, he convinces himself that he has no other choice and that he's doing this just to support his own family. At night, Dennis returns to the motel and tries to act normal in front of his mother and son, hiding the truth and pretending everything is fine. But he struggles with guilt and finds it hard to sleep. One day, Rick shows him the stolen items and explains that the government will reimburse them for replacements anyway, allowing them to make easy money. But that's not all. Rick introduces Dennis to another scam, hiring fake tenants for foreclosed homes to extract more money from the banks. At this point, Dennis realizes that he is sinking deeper into corruption, but he finds it difficult to walk away. After a while, Rick gives Dennis a check for $7,200 as his share of the stolen item sales. But Dennis refuses to take the money and asks Rick to help him get his house back. Rick decides to buy the house himself but warns Dennis that he will be in debt for $155,000. Dennis gets excited, thinking he is finally getting his home back, and thanks Rick. However, he takes a gun and hides it in his drawer, just in case. This gun, we learn, was given to him by Rick for protection. Now, Dennis begins to see everything from a different perspective and decides to act like Rick. Later, Rick takes him to witness an eviction. This time, it's a family with young children being forced out of their home. At first, Dennis speaks to them calmly, offering them the choice to leave willingly or be removed by force. But it's clear that Dennis is not heartless. He just has no other option if he wants to provide for his own family. Eventually, the police enter and tell the family the same thing they once told Dennis and his mother. At this moment, Dennis feels guilty, but he remains silent, watching from a distance as these poor people are evicted. The experience leaves him shaken. When he tries to help them afterward, they refuse his help and call him a cruel and heartless person. Seeing the harm he has caused, Dennis becomes overwhelmed with emotion and breaks down crying. Later, Dennis surprises his family by taking them back to their old home, telling them they will move in within a few weeks. His son Connor is overjoyed and runs to find his old cat. His mother Lynn is happy but questions how he managed to do this. Dennis tells her that his boss bought the house and that he will pay him back in installments. But inside, he still feels uneasy. At least for now, he finds comfort in seeing his mother and son happy. However, the more he evicts people from their homes, the guilt weighs on him. His mental state worsens, especially after evicting an elderly couple who don't even understand why they have to leave. Despite all this, Dennis has become Rick's most trusted employee. One day, Rick introduces Dennis to a wealthy investor named Mr. Freeman. But there's a catch. Someone needs to spy on Ortiz, a competing realtor who sells foreclosed homes. Rick offers Dennis 6% of the profits, slowly pulling him deeper into corruption. After much negotiation, Dennis agrees, realizing he can make more money than he ever has in his life. Rick then assigns Dennis a mission. He learns that Ortiz has sold 15 houses to a group of investors. To sabotage Ortiz's deals, Dennis and his colleague break into the houses and steal items like air conditioners and refrigerators, causing the transactions to collapse. The next day is Connor's birthday, and Dennis and his family celebrate at the motel. But things take a turn when Dennis runs into a man he had previously evicted. The man becomes furious upon seeing him. Dennis tries to ignore him, but the man refuses to let it go, blaming Dennis for ruining his life. They get into a fight in front of Lynn and Connor. Dennis tells them to go inside the room. Afterward, Dennis returns, and Lynn asks why the man knew his name. Dennis snaps, yelling that he doesn't know him, which frightens his family. At this moment, Dennis realizes how far he has fallen into a dark world that he can no longer control. Feeling lost, he returns to Rick for advice. Later, Dennis meets with Rick and a businessman named Kahana. They discuss how Ortiz's deals fell apart and discover that 6 out of the 15 buyers backed out due to the missing items, just as Rick had planned. Now, Rick is willing to return the stolen items for free, but only if the buyers agree to work with him instead of Ortiz. Kahana, seeing the financial benefits, accepts the deal, on one condition: the houses must be vacated within 30 days. Dennis and Rick exchange knowing smiles, realizing they have won. To celebrate, Rick throws a huge party at his mansion, attended by powerful guests. At the end of the night, Rick and Dennis sit by the pool. Rick enjoys their success, but Dennis, drunk and consumed by guilt, can only think about getting his house back. Rick reassures him that it will only be a few more weeks, but Dennis, exhausted from waiting, just wants to leave the motel immediately. Sensing his frustration, Rick tells him he has enough money now to buy whatever house he wants. He could even buy multiple houses. The next day, Dennis takes Rick's advice and buys a mansion, surprising his family. But instead of celebrating, Lynn and Connor are horrified. Lynn yells at him when she realizes that he forced another family out of their home just so they could live there. At that moment, she learns the truth, and she doesn't take it lightly. All she can think about is that they have destroyed an innocent family's life. Furious, she says she would rather live in a tent with her brother than in a house built on other people's suffering. Dennis is heartbroken and begs her to reconsider, but she refuses and calls her brother. The next morning, Rick calls Dennis to his office and hands him some very important files, saying they contain proof of documents that were never sent 2 years ago. He tells him that it was a fabricated scheme against Frankie Green, the man who was struggling and had been stealing water and electricity from a house next door. If Frankie won the case, Rick's entire deal would collapse. That's why Rick asks Dennis to send the file to the court before 9:45 a.m., meaning Dennis must ensure that Frankie loses his house no matter what. A while later, Dennis arrives at the court and finds Frankie there with his wife and children. Their faces show hope that they might win the case. They enter the court convinced they have a chance. Dennis feels guilty, so he goes to the bathroom to calm himself down. However, Rick keeps sending him messages, demanding to know why he hasn't submitted the documents yet. In the end, Rick calls him and threatens to destroy his life if he doesn't deliver the papers. On the other hand, Dennis knows that if he hands over the forged documents, he will be ruining Frankie's life. But then he hears Rick's voice in the background, which snaps him out of it and forces him to return to his task. Eventually, he submits the fake documents against his will. The court then rules against Frankie, taking away his house. Frankie pleads with the judge while crying, saying he has a family to take care of, but they ignore him. And just like that, Dennis's success comes at the cost of another family's destruction. Later, Dennis returns to his mansion, but he finds it empty and learns that Lynn and Connor have left. This devastates him, so he turns to alcohol, drinking until he passes out on the floor. The next morning, he wakes up to a call from Rick, who is standing at his door, telling him to hurry up because it's time to evict Frankie from his home. Dennis follows him, but when they arrive, they find the police already there, talking to the neighbors. Something seems wrong. The police inform Rick and Dennis that Frankie has been behaving erratically since the previous night, scaring his wife and children. The neighbors called the police, suspecting domestic violence. They now believe Frankie is armed and dangerous. Suddenly, Frankie shouts at the police, demanding that they leave. He insists that this is their home and that they are trespassing on his property. He raises his weapon while the police stand with their guns drawn, instructing him to put it down. A few moments later, he steps outside, visibly furious, yelling that the court system is completely unfair. He says that his house was taken from him unlawfully, and that the system is designed to crush people like him. He declares that fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Exactly what happened to him. Dennis watches everything unfold and breaks down, fully understanding Frankie's pain. He knows that all of this happened because of him. He feels guilty, but deep down, he also blames Rick for pushing him into this situation. That's when he realizes that he is not the good guy. He is the villain who evicts people from their homes. But by now, it is too late. Things take a turn for the worse when Frankie fires his gun at the police. The officers prepare to shoot back. Dennis, hiding behind a car, makes a drastic decision. He steps forward, stands in front of the police car, and calls out to Frankie. He loudly confesses that he was the one who sent the documents to the court, which means he is the reason Frankie lost his house. He also tells Frankie that he truly understands his pain. Frankie is stunned by the confession. Slowly, he lowers his weapon, his anger turning into shock. The police seize the moment and tell him to surrender, promising to reopen his case and give him a chance to keep his home. After a moment, Frankie finally steps forward and allows the police to arrest him. His wife and children, who were inside the house, come out as well. Once the situation stabilizes, Dennis is taken aside for questioning. When the police ask him why he was there, he admits that he came to evict the family. At that moment, he decides to do the right thing. He tells the police everything and gives them Rick's name along with details about the corrupt company he works for. When Rick finds out that Dennis betrayed him, he tries to stay calm, but his face clearly shows his rage. Eventually, the police arrest Rick as well, and this time, he has no way out. Dennis sits in his car, staring blankly, replaying everything that led him to this moment. Just then, Frankie's son approaches him, wanting to thank him. For the first time, Dennis has told the truth. And because of what he did, he saved a family from complete destruction. And that's where today's movie story ends. Stay tuned for more summaries and videos.